Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. When I launched this channel, my hope was to be able to sit down with experts and journalists across the association. And that's exactly the case today, as we have John Karalis. John is a longtime Celtics beat writer and media member, working for CBS, Fox 5, WBZ, among others. He's covered the Celtics for a bunch of prominent sites and organizations. Currently, he works for Boston Sports Journal and has been the host of the Locked On Celtics podcast, as you can see right there, for almost 8 years now, I believe, John, which is a phenomenal show, by the way.
Thank you very much.
I highly recommend checking it out. He also attended Emerson College, which is just so happens to be where I went for journalism and sports communications. As you may expect, we're going to talk some Celtics here today. John, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course, no problem. I think we have to start with Jaylen Brown here, who finally agreed to his supermax extension with the Celtics on Tuesday, signed it on Wednesday. You were in the building, saw you had a couple of viral clips talking about Grant Williams and Rob Williams circulating there, how he's brand new, wasn't answering their FaceTime calls. But, you know, the deal, full 5 years, no player option, which is a big win for the Celtics organization, that last part. There is a trade kicker. Do you have any major takeaways from the deal and the extended time, I guess, it took to agree on it? Or was it more just, all right, this was pretty much a foregone conclusion, now it's time to move forward with the core locked in?
Yeah, I never got the sense from anybody that there was any sort of issue with the negotiations. And so, you ask your questions and you try to poke around a little bit, and no one was saying anything other than, yeah, it's fine, it's going to get done. I think maybe some of the business that had to be done from other ends, like Jason Glushon has other clients, and when you're like, yeah, this deal is going to get done, we're basically on the same page. He's like, great, let me go get my other clients some deals, and then we'll come back to this. And the Celtics had business to take care of, the Grant Williams trade, making, trying to find guys that they could sign or trade for or whatever. And so it's very easy to say, are we good on the basics? Like, we're going to give you the 5 years. We're going to give you this. We can talk about player option. We can talk about trade kicker. And, is that going to, any of this going to be a deal breaker? No. Okay, great. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. And then that extended, and Jaylen had his other commitments. And I think it just took a little while longer. Just mostly because they were just slowly negotiating around other things. So I was never concerned. As for the deal itself, it's an interesting, there's like dichotomy here with this deal. On the one hand, I totally believe it's a deal that Jaylen Brown earned. He earned 35% of the cap by becoming an All-NBA player. He qualified for the Supermax, and every Supermax player got 35% of the cap. Jaylen just happens to be the guy that gets his at the most lucrative time in NBA history, so he gets the richest deal in NBA history. And that's just how it is. And I'm not going to begrudge a guy for getting the deal that he earned. At the same time, there are the people who are saying he makes this much more than Nikola Jokic, which doesn't make any sense, and LeBron and KD and all this other stuff. Like, yeah, is he gonna suddenly become an MVP player because he makes $60 million? No, he's not. He's still Jaylen Brown. And I just worry that people are going to say, well, you make this much money now, therefore the expectation is different, which is stupid, because you can give me $60 million right now and be like, well, you should be able to speak fluent French. Like, no, I cannot. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to, no matter how much money you give me. Now I can learn it. I can get on that Duolingo real fast and try my best, but doesn't change who I am fundamentally. Doesn't change who Jaylen Brown is fundamentally. So I hope that people, and I know they won't, but I can still hope that they will cut him a little bit of slack and understand you got the deal that you earned based on the circumstances, but he's still Jaylen. He still has his flaws, and that stuff still needs to be, he even said it. People haven't seen my best. So he needs to get to his best, and he just needs to get there a little more quickly so people can not overreact.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it was so easy for the Twitter trolls out there. We saw that video circulating, or I guess X now, as it's being called. Who knows
Yeah,
what's going
whatever.
on
Whatever.
with that app? But we saw, there's someone put together that compilation of him trying to go left in the playoffs, and it's just been circulating everywhere. And
Yeah.
I'm sure he can't go on social media without seeing it. It's just, and it's so easy to cherry pick stats and create a narrative. I wrote an article about. I wrote an article for Celtics blog recently. We're just talking about pretty much exactly what you were saying, which is, the negatives are there. I'm not saying they're not. But we're coming to a point here where the negatives have been so overblown that it's all people identify his game with. Like, yes, the guy turns it over. But when you look at the advanced metrics, he's actually not turning it over as much as a lot of other stars in similar situations with the same usage rate. In the postseason, I believe he was tied for 15th in turnovers per game among fellow stars, 26 in the regular season. So yes, the issues are there. He needs to clean up on the turnovers. I personally would love to see him really work on his catch and shoot three. I think he was sitting around 33.7%, something like that. If he can just bump that number up to 35, 36 even, I'm not expecting Jaylen Brown to become an elite shooter. At this stage in his career, we know what he is. He's just going to continue to improve on the things he can improve upon. But that seems like an area of his game where he's capable of making those shots. So if he can work on fine tuning, hey, maybe work on the left hand a little bit. I'm not going to go crazy criticizing you for it. Work on the catch and shoot three. You don't have to completely overhaul your game, but there are the little things that you can improve to make you worth it for the contract you just signed.
Yeah, I feel like Jaylen, it sounds funny, but the way I've been putting it is he actually needs to do a little bit less and he'll end up producing more.
Yeah.
You don't have to go 1-on-3. You're not the type of guy who's going to go 1-on-3. Very few people can go 1-on-3. Tatum can't do it. It's just impossible to be a top 3 player when you don't have that. He just doesn't have that in him, right? So stop trying to be that. I am a little bit concerned that he's going to say, okay, I make $60 million a year. I need to do XYZ because that's what a $60 million a year player does. Be like, well, again, that's not what Jaylen Brown does. So just dial it back. Turn the volume down from 10 to like 8.5 and stop doing too much in certain situations. Give the ball up, make your move, find a way to get it back, do something else. It's okay to do that on the Celtics team. And I think by giving the ball up instead of trying to drive 1-on-3, it just fosters more trust amongst his teammates. And the thing that he and Jason Tatum, let's be fair, and Jason Tatum both need to understand is everyone else on the floor wants to give the ball back to those guys. So when you give the ball up, those teammates are thinking, okay, they gave the ball to me. How can I give the ball back? Unless it's a wide open shot. But when you get the ball, unless it's like a drive and kick, if you're just getting the ball and there's like, okay, I'm double covered, you get it. Your job is to move. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick couple of dribbles and I'm going to swing the ball, and that swing will create another swing. And Tatum or Brown are going to get the ball. Tatum and Brown need to understand that that's going to be the case. So give the ball up. Stop trying to do so much, and you'll actually end up scoring more in the clutch. And that's going to make it so people will say, okay, $60 million is still a lot, but this guy's producing in the clutch, so I can't complain.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. I'm very interested to see what the off-ball work rate and movement looks like for Jaylen Brown this year, because we saw him be so successful in that with Marcus Smart, a guy who is now gone. One of their favorite moves together was the backdoor cut where Smart would dribble it.
I love that.
Yeah, bring it. Oh, it was incredible and so effective. You think that teams would be able to sniff it out a little bit better, but it's hard when you have a point guard bring the ball in and pinch a defender over. It's hard to try to shut that off while also being aware of the guy cutting baseline. It's just the reality of basketball. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
So it's hard, but that was his most effective off-ball scoring method. And now with Marcus Smart gone and Derek White, as we saw in the press conference yesterday, slated to be the starting point guard, going to be very interesting to see what the chemistry looks like between those guys. Because, Jason Tatum had the ball in his hands a lot, didn't do a ton of off-ball scoring, if we're being honest. But Jaylen Brown while the usage rate's going to be really high, it was over 30% last year. He's going to need to do a little bit more of that because he's just not the one on this team. He's the 1A or even, the 2 if you want to go there. So it's going to be very interesting to see now that he's got his money, how he continues to develop his game. And I agree. The hope is that by not doing too much, he can actually produce more. So I wanted to shift gears here to financial implications because of the Jaylen Brown Supermax. You got him signing that deal. Kristaps Porzingis signing his 2-year, $60 million extension. And Jason Tatum is set to sign his own Supermax next offseason. So the window this team has before they have to make some really tough financial decisions under the new CBA, which I've heard you rant about it enough on the Locked On NBA podcast. I think every person in NBA media is on the same page. What is going on here? Not just it's a disaster in its own right. But the Celtics window now with this core and the finances that they are putting into it is realistically 2 to 3 years. So at some point they're going to have to make the tough decision. Hey, are we going to follow the path we saw Phoenix take, which is having 3 or 4 guys making a ton of money and the rest of the roster on minimums or near minimums, or they're going to have to trade one of those really expensive players, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Kristaps Porzingis, someone else if they get a payday between now and then. Do you get the sense that one of those routes would be more realistic for this team? And if by any chance it does end up being the Suns' path where you're so top heavy and you have a bunch of vet minimums, which player out of those really expensive guys do you think would be the most likely to get moved?
So I think this upcoming season, we're sticking with this core, Brown, Tatum, Porzingis. Next summer, somewhere between the trade deadline and a year from now, I think Brogdon will go and they will try to find a reasonably priced point guard option to back up Derek White. And then that'll keep them below the second apron for the next season. So you got a 2-year window. You might be able to squeeze a third year out because the cap's going up. But at that point, Jason Tatum's extension will kick in. And he's going to get more than Jaylen Brown because his 35% in 2 years is going to be something like 20% higher than Jaylen Brown's 35%, right? Because the cap keeps going up at about a 10% rate. So at that point, Al Horford's money will come off and they may either say, hey, you're a minimum guy, or he might just quit. He might just retire. He's going to be 39 at that point. He might just have had enough. So they can probably find a way to tinker their way to a 3-year, like maximum 3 years with this group. If they win a championship in one of these next 2 years, it'll make that third year a whole lot more palatable. Because not only do you get the bump financially, there's that feeling of, hey, let's repeat, and you get that extra, just that extra casual exposure, right? Everybody, the rising tide will raise all boats in that scenario. So I think they can milk 2 or 3 years out of this, unless it is just clear that one of these 3 is not living up to expectations, in which case that one guy is going to have to go. So it could be Jaylen, it could be Porzingis. I doubt that it's going to be Jason Tatum, but there is a world where some people might say, hey, Tatum is a star, a superstar, but he's not the guy. He's not him, as people like to say nowadays. And that's another debate. Can Tatum get to an MVP level? He's, I think, solidly a 3rd or 4th place kind of MVP kind of guy. Can he get up to that MVP solidly, or a runner-up MVP and be the type of guy that can step up and carry a team through an entire playoff run and not just here and there in a series? So that's something to consider. But I think over the next few seasons, it's going to be a very close eye on, does one of these 3 guys not fit Are they not working well as a trio? And if they're not, then that one guy is going to get moved. And everybody's looking at Jaylen as the guy because, like I said, Tatum's probably not the guy. And Porzingis is, at the very least, a big 7'3", plays a different type of position. So you kind of eliminate the overlap of Tatum and Brown. So it's complicated. It does start a clock ticking on these guys. It's going to be very interesting to see what Brad Stevens does, but there are a lot of moving parts potentially over the next few seasons.
Yeah, I think you look at the case. If we're going to build a case for all of those three guys, what would be the likelihood or reason behind them getting moved? I think you laid out Jaylen pretty easily. We've seen Jaylen and Jason together for quite some time now. So if they just continue to underperform, and underperforming, it's very simple. It's not winning a championship, or at least failing to get back to the finals. This is very much championship or bust. At least it feels like, with how much money is committed to this team from ownership. So if they fail to do that, and Jaylen doesn't take that next step we're talking about, and maybe he does continue to try to do too much, which is worst case scenario for this team, then it's easy to say, hey, we'll move him. Porzingis, not making quite as much money as those two, especially once their super maxes kick in. They'll be making almost half of what they do. So it's not even realistic to compare them. But, the likelihood or the case to be made for him is also pretty simple. It's, let's say injuries derail his career. Sure. And he's coming off the healthiest season of his career. So the Celtics are buying high here to an extent. They weren't necessarily buying high in the package they sent out. I know everyone loves Marcus Smart, heart and soul of this team. Everything that's going to be said about Marcus Smart has already been said. But, on paper, you trade Marcus Smart, you get Kristaps Porzingis and 2 first-round picks. One of them turns into a myriad of second-round picks in Jordan Walsh. That's a fantastic package. Almost every general manager in the league would take that, depending on the roster they're working with. So that's Porzingis injuries are the way he would be going out. Tatum, it would really be shocking to see a turn of events. It feels like stuff would have to happen off the court in terms of them being unhappy with the direction of the franchise and really demanding out or something like that. But I will say, if for whatever reason it does turn out to be Tatum or Brown and not Porzingis, Danny Ainge will try to find his way back to Boston just to pull off that trade, because that would be his dream. That'd be the biggest return package in NBA history.
I know. Yeah. Do a guest GM spot, like like on a rap record or something like that. Like he just now a feature for the Jaylen Brown trade featuring Danny Ainge.
Yeah. He literally just gets like producer credits.
Yeah, right.
Oh man. Speaking of the Porzingis trade, we just talked about it flat out. We talked about the return was what Boston sent out. Actually, quickly before we touch on that, what are the vibes on Malcolm Brogdon? Because it's been we've heard crickets pretty much on that front. And then yesterday at Jaylen's press conference, we heard, hey, they're taking baby steps in the healing process and towards reintegrating him into this team. It wasn't great in terms of what we heard. It didn't sound fantastic. So I know we don't have a lot there. If you're hearing anything, if you get the general sense of what that situation is?
Yeah. I haven't heard anything from Brogdon's side. I assume it's a lot like Ray Allen back a few years ago, in 2000, what was that? 2011 or so, 2012, where they said, hey, they had a trade in place. I think it was Ray Allen to Milwaukee, and they told him you're traded. And then all of a sudden it fell apart and they're like, oh, wait, never mind. I feel like this deal was done. The parameters of this deal were reported, and it was basically a done deal. The Clippers backed out at the last minute, and that, I think, caught the Celtics by surprise. And, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a conversation already. Thanks, Malcolm. Sorry, it was only 1 year. This is something we got to do, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, oh, hey, by the way, welcome back, baby. It's very much, I don't know if you're old enough to know the Seinfeld reference where Kramer breaks up with his girlfriend, and then they cut back to him later, and he's like, no, it was all my fault. I take it all back. Yeah. I felt like that's kind of the basketball version of what happened. And so it does it does create some kind of like, I don't know if animosity is the right word, but yeah, there does have to be some healing. And, Malcolm came to Boston to win a championship. He approved the deal to come to Boston. He said, I am taking a step back. I am going to be your sixth man. And that, all of a sudden after it's all said and done, to be like, hey, thanks. Now you're out of here. It does kind of like sting. I would be stung if I was Malcolm Brogdon. So I've raised the question of whether Brogdon can even, come back to start this season. Now he's going to have to, and he's going to have to be a professional. And that's just it. This is the crappy side of the NBA. He has to be a professional. The Celtics have to be professional about it. I'm going to have to ask him about it. And, that's going to be like the first question that he gets hit with at media day. And he's probably going to have to answer that a couple more times as more media comes through during the training camp and whatever. And even as he goes to other cities, because other cities are going to say, you go to LA, that first game in Los Angeles, Clippers media, they're going to ask, hey, you were almost traded here. You go to Indy, people in Indy are going to say, hey, you were almost traded. You left here to go there. And so he's going to get that repeatedly throughout the course of the season. He has to be a pro and handle it, which is tough because we're asking a guy to put aside very human feelings and put aside some hurt feelings and just say, sorry, sucker, you got to deal with it.
Yeah, I think, and all the credit in the world to Malcolm Brogdon. It feels like if there was a player to do this and return and fit seamlessly with the team across the association, it would be him. Everything about him screams the ultimate professional, to an extent. It does seem, we've heard reports come out recently that of rival executives saying they call Boston about Brogdon and they were completely shut down. Like, he's a valued member of our team. You kind of get the sense that if the right deal comes around, that Brad Stevens would still pull the trigger.
Sure.
Yeah. And it seems like that is still an extremely delicate situation, whereas it's going to be something worth monitoring over the coming months, because, the reality is Boston's depth is not what it was last year, at least on paper, especially after losing Grant Williams. So if you can turn Malcolm Brogdon and use a bunch of the picks that you just acquired this offseason through a bunch of trades to turn him into two quality rotational players, that's extremely appealing from Boston's perspective.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. I mean, look, they're going to have to figure out a way. I don't think they make any more real moves over the course of this summer. I think they sit tight and they take it into the season, but the season will tell you what they need. And they're going to have to find a way to bring back some sort of talent. And if it has to be Brogdon, then so be it, because they've only got so many options for a trade. And they do have the TPE, which is about $6 million from the Grant Williams trade. Okay, that can get you somebody. But if you need to get somebody who makes more than that, you got to find a way to make it work. And this is the 1 year where maybe before the real restrictive stuff kicks in next summer with the new collective bargaining agreement, maybe this is the year where you got to make that deal. So it's, hard to say, man. Brad Stevens has a very difficult job. This has to be a championship team. It has to be a championship team within the next couple of years, or else very, very, very difficult decisions are going to have to be made all across this organization. So if they can't figure it out in the next 2-3 years, then the future is going to be very, very interesting. So everything's on the table, including Malcolm Brogdon, I can say any day between now and the trade deadline, but I mean, realistically, after the season starts and they figure out exactly what they need as a team.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You said you don't expect any major moves. They're going to pretty much carry this group into the season as is. Free agency targets. They still have 4 to 5 roster spots to fill out. They've got plenty of players to bring in. And obviously there are still some solid options out there on the free agency market, guys who were looking at more money. At least they thought they were. And now they're looking at taking the vet minimum. Obviously wings like Kelly Oubre come to mind, who I think he's so popular. When looking at free agents you can get for cheap, really explosive offensive players tend to jump off the page. And Kelly Oubre is that guy, averaged 20 points per game for the Hornets last year, but the efficiency was horrendous. I think shot 31.9% from three. He was just chucking. The Hornets had a lot of chuckers on their team last year. Do you get the sense that the Celtics, or I guess not even get the sense, do you think that the Celtics could bring in not necessarily Kelly Oubre, but a potential like rotational player at wing or ball handler, because Payton Pritchard's the third guard on this roster as of right now. He's in a very interesting situation of his own, and we haven't even talked about him. But what do you think about the free agency and how that will shake out for them over the coming months?
They do have a need at the wing.
Yeah.
And I feel like Oubre could end up being this year's version of the Dennis Schroeder signing.
Ooh.
Which was
we all know how that turned out.
Right. Think about the parallels. Here's a guy that was like, we don't know about him, as a player, as a fit, right? We're not sure. But man, that price is so good that maybe you just pay the minimum or whatever, and you say, all right, let's just figure this out and see if he fits. And you could play him, and he could have some moments, but also he could torpedo everything. And then at the trade deadline, you're like, bye. Hey. And that it could take a very Schroeder kind of path this season. But it might be worth the try, because if it doesn't take a Schroeder path, maybe Oubre says, hey, you know what? The knock on me, if you're Kelly Oubre talking to yourself and coming to grips with things, is the knock on me is I'm not efficient, and that I am just throwing up shots all the time. Watch me play for a good team. Watch me fit in on a good team, and watch me actually be a more well-rounded basketball player, and then watch me get a contract next year. Like, that could just be the Celtics don't give a damn if he's faking a year of good behavior. Go ahead. You're not coming back next year. So if there is a scenario where they bring him in and you say, hey, you can pretend, I don't care if you're catfishing half the league, doesn't matter to us, as long as you're good here with us, fine. We'll talk you up. We'll tell all the other GMs that you're a great, great fit, and maybe you've turned a corner. We don't care. Just be on your best behavior with us. And hey, maybe that could be a steal of the offseason. But unless it's presented that he is just ready to remake his image and take less money to be on a good team, to be a good soldier on a good team, unless that's the scenario, I don't think they touch him. But if it is, then hey, flyer, cheap. Let's give it a shot. Celtics have a need at that position. What the hell? Why not?
Yeah, I mean, the upside is monumental. This is a guy who is a 20-point per game scorer. He wouldn't be on this team, but off the bench, he could be a 12 to 15 point per game scorer if the efficiency is there. And then, you know what, for as much grief as we give Dennis Schroeder, and he was a torpedo to this team at times, without him, the Celtics may not have been able to get Malcolm Brogdon last offseason, because obviously traded for Daniel Tice. Those contracts were a mass accumulated in the package for Malcolm Brogdon. Now the feel is they probably could have found another way to make that work, but you say Dennis Schroeder at least contributed to the Celtics roster in one positive way there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. I think we don't have time to talk about Payton Pritchard, but he's going to see an expanded role with this team, especially with, whether Malcolm Brogdon is healthy enough to start the season. Pritchard's probably looking at 10 to 20 minutes a night regularly, depending on the matchup. And he's a guy who can give a lot of minutes. He's proved that he can stay healthy and be a workhorse. And this is, the feel with Payton Pritchard is, it seems like the animosity is completely gone. He's been posting Celtics stuff on his Instagram, etc. The issue with him is he just wanted to play, and now he gets the opportunity to play for a very, very good team. So
he was clear about that. I want to make sure that people know he was clear about that. We talked to him. There was a game late in the season, and he said, it was after the trade deadline. He said, I want to make sure that people know I love the city. I love this team. I love my teammates. I just want to play. And that's where this comes from. And I got to respect that, man. I got to respect that.
Yeah.
He's a professional basketball player. He's got a contract coming up. He wants to continue to do this at the NBA level. So, yeah, make millions of dollars playing basketball, and he just wants to play. He wants to show that he can do it. And he's a gym rat. He wants to get out on the floor. So I respect everything he said last year. And yeah, this can be like you said, 15 to 20 minutes a game. I can see him coming in late in the first quarter, span to the middle of the second quarter, do the same thing late in the third into the fourth, and that's your Payton Pritchard role.
Yeah, and make no mistake too, for anyone who's watching this, Payton Pritchard is a capable hooper. Every time he was on the floor in garbage time last year, 99% of the time he was by far the best player on the floor. Like this is a guy who is ready to contribute. It just the Celtics were so deep in their front court or in their back court, last year that it didn't make sense. There wasn't a spot for him to play. So, John, I've taken up a bunch of your time. I have one last thing I wanted to touch on you about, which is Joe Mazzulla. We can't do a Celtics podcast without talking about Joe Mazzulla. There was a large section of the Celtics fan base calling for his head for the majority of the playoffs, second half of the season, even, and especially after the Celtics were eliminated last year. Specifically when they went down 3-0 to Miami. After they came back 3-3, a lot of the fan base died down on that part. But I personally was happy to see them give him another shot. I think the additions of Sam Cassell and Charles Lee, along with a full offseason to really work and implement his system, will be beneficial. People don't understand how tough of a spot he was put in last year. So where do you stand on Joe Mazzulla right now?
I kind of echo your sentiments. He is it's unfair to judge him completely on what I consider one data point, right? Like we talk about the, analytics, and he's very heavily analytics, and there are definitely a lot of flaws to his coaching last year. I'm not going to argue that it was a good year. It was absolutely, you do have to give him the credit of getting this team as far as it did as a rookie coach put in this situation.
Yeah.
And I've talked to assistants and I've heard from them like, yeah, this is actually, that was hard to do. And, there are people who are saying like, I don't know if I could have gotten them that far. So it's to give a guy the head coaching job 2 days before media day and say, go and have them come out the way they did. And yeah, there were flaws and definitely flaws. Now let's see. This is the year to now start judging a little bit more and say, okay, you have had that full off season. You do have experienced assistant coaches now, championship experience on your bench. Sam Cassell won championships as a player, both as a lead guard and at the end of the bench. He won
with this franchise too.
That's right. He did it in Boston. He knows what it means to this city. He's seen this building with, a championship run. He knows it. Charles Lee knows how to win a championship. But not only that, Sam Cassell coached, was an assistant on a team with two wings, and granted, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are not Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but still two wings that there are similarities, and he can kind of say, these were the issues. This is how we made it work, so on and so forth. Charles Lee came from Milwaukee. Well, Milwaukee, what kind of defense do they play? Exclusively for the drop coverage with Brook Lopez, and they figured out a way to be very, very successful. Now you got Porzingis, you can play the same type of defense. So Lee knows how to run that kind of defense. So it's an important element here to when you're adding and changing and tweaking, to have guys who are familiar with that particular style that you're trying to implement. And they have very respected voices. They know what it takes. They relate to the players. They both have played. And I think they will relate to the players very well. It's going to be a great kind of, I think, bridge between the roster and the coach. So I have high hopes. And that year of experience that Joe Mazzulla had, that is an important element to this. So I feel like this is the season where we can look at Joe Mazzulla and say, all right, what do you really got for us? Let's see what we get. We saw what you did last year. Let's see what you're doing this year. Are you changing? Are you still relying on certain things? what's different, and see how he grows. And there's a good chance that this could work out very well.
Yeah, it's a huge year for him, huge year for Jaylen Brown, huge year for every single member of this organization. John, I'm going to put you on the spot here really quick. Is this the year Banner 18 comes to Boston in Mike Gorman's final year, which we didn't even get to talk about Mike Gorman, which is fine.
But legend, I hope so.
Oh, one of the best broadcasters in the sport, history of the sport. Is this the year?
I hope more than anything that, forget Al Horford for a second, who, damn it, he deserves a ring.
He deserves his ring.
Al Horford deserves a ring. But man, I want to see Mike Gorman call one more championship season.
Oh my God.
That would be the best. Look, this it kind of almost has to be the year. But a lot of teams are going for it this year. It's going to be a very competitive. So the Celtics are, I think, one of the top 2 or 3 contenders in this league. I think this very well could be the year, and I'm hoping it is for all the reasons I just said.
Yeah, I personally feel robbed, man. You know how old I was when Mike Gorman called his last championship team?
Don't tell me.
8 years old, John. 8 years old. I didn't get to experience it. I need it. I need it. And that's all I have for you today, John. Thank you so much for joining me to talk some Celtics.
Kick me in the nuts.
I really
by telling me you were 8 in 2008 and then say goodbye. Wow.
John, we've got the next. That's just the next wave of Emerson alums doing big things in sports media. I mean, both of us are watching, Sam Presti, Will Dawkins, etc.
Yeah, man.
Actually do their thing.
Congratulations to Will, man. Love that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So cool. You can follow John on Twitter, or X as it's being called now, at John_Karalis. Check out his work for Boston Sports Journal, the Locked On NBA Network. He also has a book, The Boston Celtics All-Time All-Stars. If you listen to his podcast, he will be promoting that pretty consistently. Great read. I'll link to his website and Twitter in the description so you can find all of that. Thank you so much for tuning in to Jeff Pratt Talks Hoops. I'll have a new video for you early next week.